"I'm sorry, but we can't just hand out cash to anyone who walks in," bank manager Jessica Keller said, her voice dripping with condescension as she slid the withdrawal slip back across the counter. "Especially not amounts like this." Her words echoed through the marble lobby of Meridian Financial's flagship branch. A small circle of employees had formed nearby, their curiosity piqued. One young teller leaned toward her colleague, whispering just loud enough to be heard, "Yeah, right. She doesn't even look like she has that kind of money." Laughter rippled through the group, but the woman standing at the counter didn't flinch. Her name was Angela Freeman, and in just a few moments, every person in that bank would regret their assumptions. Because the woman they had dismissed, mocked, and humiliated was about to change their lives forever. Have you ever been judged before someone even knew who you were? If you believe everyone deserves respect, comment "respect first" and hit that subscribe button now. It all began when an elegant black woman stood calmly at the counter, her posture poised, her expression composed. She was surrounded by bank staff whose faces ranged from indifferent to openly dismissive. But what they didn't know was that Angela Freeman wasn't just another customer. She was the CEO of Meridian Financial, and 25 years of hard work had led her to this very moment. And now, she was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Angela Freeman stood behind a very different counter once before, wearing a pressed uniform and a name tag that read, "Teller Trainee." Her journey from that first position to the executive suite was nothing short of extraordinary. Angela didn't come from money or connections. What she did have was determination, intelligence, and an unwavering work ethic, qualities that propelled her through the ranks of Meridian Financial. From teller to loan officer, from branch manager to regional director, Angela mastered every role she took on. Along the way, she earned her MBA from Harvard, led record-breaking quarters in 3 different divisions, and developed a reputation as a problem solver who could turn struggling branches around. When she reached the C-suite as Chief Operations Officer 5 years ago, many assumed she had hit the glass ceiling. They were wrong. 3 months ago, when Meridian's CEO announced his retirement, the board of directors found themselves at a crossroads. Despite Angela's impeccable credentials and 2 decades of loyal service, some board members hesitated. In private meetings, their concerns had little to do with her qualifications and more to do with whether major clients would accept a black woman as the face of the company. After a contentious vote, Angela Freeman became the first black woman to lead Meridian Financial. Her acceptance speech was gracious but pointed. "I will ensure that every client, every employee, and every community we serve experiences the same level of respect and excellence. No exceptions." These weren't empty words. Behind closed doors, Angela had been tracking a disturbing pattern of customer complaints. At first glance, overall satisfaction scores looked good. But when she dug deeper, the numbers told a troubling story, one the previous leadership had buried. Certain branches, certain demographics, a clear disparity in service quality. Rather than relying on reports and second-hand accounts, Angela decided to see for herself. Going undercover wasn't just a gimmick, it was a mission. And what she discovered would shake Meridian Financial to its core. Experiencing the unfiltered reality of customer service was the only way Angela Freeman could understand what her clients truly faced. The flagship branch downtown was managed by Jessica Keller, a 15-year veteran with an impressive record, on paper. Her numbers were exceptional: high transaction volumes, excellent new account generation. But something stood out in the raw data. Formal complaints were few, yet customer exit interviews told a different story. People were leaving, especially customers of color. When asked why, most gave vague answers, unwilling to elaborate. Instead, they simply took their business elsewhere. A test, unlike any other. At 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, Angela Freeman walked through the revolving doors of Meridian Financial's flagship branch. She had deliberately chosen modest attire, a simple navy hoodie, dark slacks, and a baseball cap. Her natural hair was styled neatly but conservatively, her makeup understated. She carried a well-maintained but unbranded purse. To anyone looking, she appeared to be a regular middle-class customer, not the CEO of the entire institution. Angela took a seat in the waiting area, ostensibly checking her phone, but in reality, she was carefully observing the customer service dynamics around her. What she witnessed in those first 15 minutes was more revealing than 1,000 customer surveys. A white businessman in an expensive suit approached the entrance. Before he even reached the counter, a staff member intercepted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you today?" He was immediately escorted to a desk, bypassing the line entirely. Minutes later, an elderly Asian couple entered. They were told to take a number and wait. No smile, no warmth. Just a pointing finger toward the seating area. A young white woman in casual clothes approached the quick service counter. The teller chatted amicably with her, asking about her weekend plans. Her transaction was completed in under 2 minutes. Then, a Hispanic man in janitor's work clothes stepped up to the same counter. Suddenly, there were additional questions. He was asked for multiple forms of ID. The teller looked him up and down suspiciously. His simple check cashing request took nearly 10 minutes. Angela had seen enough. And what happened next would shake this entire bank to its core. Angela watched the pattern repeat itself 6 more times before finally stepping up to the counter. By then, she had been waiting for 37 minutes, despite the branch being only moderately busy. 3 white customers who arrived after her had already been served. When Angela finally reached Teller Beth's window, the young woman's smile faltered. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous customer. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please," Angela said, sliding her ID and withdrawal slip across the counter. The amount, $115,000. Beth's eyes widened slightly. She examined Angela's driver's license, then looked at her face, then back at the ID, as if double-checking whether they were the same person. "This is a large amount," she said, her voice rising just enough to catch the attention of her colleague at the next window. "Yes, it is," Angela replied calmly. "But it's well within the daily limit for my account type." Beth didn't respond. Instead, she turned and whispered something to Mark, the senior teller at the next station. Mark glanced over, nodded, then walked over, positioning himself directly behind Beth, towering over the counter. "Is there a problem here?" Mark asked loudly. His question wasn't directed at Beth. It was directed at Angela. Heads turned throughout the lobby. Other customers stared. An older woman clutched her purse tighter. Angela felt the weight of every eye in the room. The silent judgment. The immediate assumption that she must be doing something wrong. With remarkable composure, Angela placed her bank card on the counter alongside her ID. "No problem at all," she said evenly. "I'm simply making a withdrawal from my account." Mark picked up her ID, studying it with exaggerated scrutiny. "We've been seeing some unusual activity on these types of accounts lately," he said, emphasizing these types just enough to make his meaning clear. "We need to be extra careful." Angela's expression remained calm. "What types of accounts would those be exactly?" she asked, her voice steady. Mark ignored the question. "Beth, can you pull up the account history, please?" he instructed. "Let's see what kind of transaction patterns we're looking at." Beth tapped at her keyboard. Another staff member drifted over. His name tag read, Richard. He leaned in and whispered something to Mark, not quite quietly enough. Probably one of those money laundering or check cashing schemes. Angela heard every word, and in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just about policy. It was about who they thought she was. And they were very, very wrong. Richard didn't even try to hide his contempt as he looked Angela up and down, taking in her modest clothing and natural hair with a smirk. "We just need to verify the funds are actually yours," he said with false sweetness. "You understand, right? It's for your protection." This humiliation was calculated and deliberate, yet Angela maintained her dignity, standing tall, her voice unwavering. "I understand the need for security. I've provided my identification and bank card. I'm a customer of this bank and have been for many years. I'd like to complete my transaction now, please." That's when Richard called over Jessica Keller, the branch manager. She strode across the lobby with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in her life, her expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. "Ma'am, I understand there's some confusion about your withdrawal request," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask for Angela's name, just immediately assumed authority over her. "There's no confusion on my part," Angela replied. "I'm simply trying to access my own money." Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. $115,000 is a significant amount of cash. "May I ask what it's for?" The question, one that hadn't been asked of a single white customer making large transactions that morning, hung in the air between them. The double standard couldn't have been more blatant if they had put up a sign. The tension in the room thickened as Jessica Keller stared down at Angela, her face a mask of polished professionalism that couldn't quite hide the disdain underneath. The bustling bank lobby seemed to quiet around them, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. "Mrs. Freeman," Jessica said finally, glancing at Angela's ID, holding it by the edges as if reluctant to touch it too much. "This amount doesn't seem appropriate for someone like you. This bank prides itself on dignity, and we have a certain class of customers we serve. We can't serve you here." There it was. The mask had slipped. In just a few words, Jessica had revealed exactly what this was about. Not security protocols, not banking regulations, just pure, unfiltered prejudice dressed up in corporate speak. Angela felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced countless times throughout her career. That moment when someone underestimates you, dismisses you, reduces your entire existence to a stereotype. Behind Jessica, the staff exchanged knowing glances. Beth looked down, seemingly uncomfortable, her hands fidgeting with a stack of deposit slips that didn't need straightening. Her body language screamed discomfort, but her silence made her complicit all the same. Mark and Richard didn't bother hiding their amusement. Richard actually snickered, covering his mouth with his hand in a poor attempt to conceal his laughter. "I'm curious," Richard chimed in, leaning against the counter with newfound confidence now that his boss was backing him up. His voice carried deliberately, ensuring that nearby customers could hear. "Did you come into some money recently? A settlement, perhaps? Or maybe an inheritance?" He paused, then added with a smirk, "Or maybe you laundered the money?" The implication was crystal clear. In their minds, there was simply no legitimate way a black woman could have access to this kind of money. It had to be some kind of windfall, some stroke of luck, rather than hard work, intelligence, and determination. At the next window, a young white mother with 2 children had paused her transaction, openly watching the scene unfold. She pulled her children closer, whispering something in their ears, teaching them, perhaps unconsciously, to view Angela as someone suspicious, someone who didn't belong. That was the unspoken message behind every glance, every sneer, every obstacle placed in her path. Angela took a deep breath. her composure remarkable given the circumstances. Not a hint of the rage she must have felt showed on her face. "I'd like to speak with someone who can actually help me complete my transaction, please. Someone with the authority to override whatever concerns you seem to have." Every word was carefully chosen, professional, reasonable, giving them no ammunition, no excuse to label her as angry or difficult. Jessica's smile tightened, a flash of irritation crossing her face at being challenged. "Ma'am, I am the highest authority in this branch. I'm the manager. There's no one else for you to speak with." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that was still perfectly audible to everyone nearby. The scent of her expensive cologne, likely meant to convey success and authority, wafted across the counter. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the check-cashing place down the street. They're more accustomed to handling your type of banking needs. You should be able to get maybe $1,000 or two there." The dismissal was so blatant, so disrespectful, that a collective intake of breath could be heard from customers shamelessly eavesdropping on the exchange. Behind the teller windows, the daily operations of the bank continued. Cash counting machines whirred quietly in the background. Security cameras mounted in each corner of the ceiling recorded everything, every expression, every word, every microaggression playing out in high-definition detail. Angela glanced up at one of those cameras, a flicker of something, perhaps knowledge, crossing her face so briefly that no one noticed. Without another word to Jessica, Angela reached into her purse, a modest leather bag, a gift from her team when she was promoted to COO, and pulled out her phone. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, stepping slightly away from the counter while still remaining in full view of everyone as she dialed. Richard nudged Mark, both of them watching with smirks on their faces. Richard whispered something that made Mark stifle a laugh. Beth, the teller who had first assisted Angela, kept her eyes down, but her discomfort was palpable in the rigid set of her shoulders. Another customer, an older black man in a postal worker's uniform, watched the scene unfold with a resigned expression that spoke volumes. This wasn't surprising to him. This was Tuesday. This was banking while black. "Yes. Hello," Angela spoke into the phone, her voice taking on an even more professional tone than before. "This is Angela Freeman calling." Richard, watching her, stood up straighter and exaggeratedly mimicked her posture, sticking his nose in the air and silently mouthing, "Angela Freeman calling," to Mark, who smirked. His performance was for the benefit of the entire staff, a show of dominance, of belonging, at Angela's expense. The bank's mission statement was prominently displayed on the wall behind them. Building financial success together with trust, respect, and integrity. The words now seemed like a cruel joke in contrast to the scene unfolding beneath them. Jessica stepped forward, her patience clearly wearing thin. The soft squeak of her polished leather shoes on the marble floor sounded oddly loud in the tension-filled space. "I'm going to have to ask you to conclude your business elsewhere," she said sharply. "You're creating a disturbance in our branch. The lower banks out there will be able to serve you, not here." The irony was staggering. The only disturbance was the staff's treatment of a legitimate customer attempting to access her own funds. But in Jessica's mind, and in the minds of those who shared her biases, Angela's mere presence, her audacity to expect equal service, was itself the disturbance. Angela continued her call as if Jessica hadn't spoken. "Yes, I'm still at the downtown branch. No, they've refused the transaction. Yes, that's correct." Her calm was unsettling to Jessica. People in Angela's position, being denied service, being humiliated publicly, were supposed to react in one of two ways: explosive anger that would justify removal, or defeated acceptance that would end in retreat. But Angela Freeman wasn't here to retreat. Retreat. Angela's composed resistance followed neither script, and it clearly unnerved Jessica. "Ma'am," Jessica's voice rose, the veneer of professionalism cracking further. "If you don't leave the premises immediately, I'll be forced to call security." Angela turned slightly away from her, still speaking clearly into the phone. The bank's large wall clock ticked loudly, marking each second of the standoff. 10:17 a.m., a time that would soon be etched into numerous termination documents in the hours to come. Jessica signaled to Mark, who reached for the security phone extension. The situation was escalating by the second. Other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch, sensing that something significant was unfolding. That's when Angela turned away from Jessica and spoke her final words into the phone, words that would change everything in the next few moments. "Diane, I need you at the downtown branch. Now." The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. Diane, as in Diane Porter, head of operations for the entire bank. Angela knew her. Angela had her direct number. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jessica's face, the first crack in her confident facade. Who was this woman? How did she have direct access to one of the most senior executives in the company? The question lingered for only a moment before arrogance reasserted itself. Probably just name-dropping, Jessica thought. A bluff. People like her always try to intimidate with claims of knowing important people. Hit the subscribe and like button if you support Angela, the undercover boss in this story. Across the city, in Meridian Financial's headquarters, the executive suite suddenly burst into activity. Diane Porter stood bolt upright at her desk, her face draining of color as she recognized the voice on the other end of the line. She knew exactly who was calling her. Diane had worked alongside Angela for over a decade. They had broken countless glass ceilings together, navigated the treacherous waters of corporate finance as women of color, supported each other through personal and professional challenges. And now, Angela was calling her. "Get me every customer complaint from the downtown branch for the past year," Diane barked at her assistant. "Every single one. Even the ones that didn't make it into the formal review process." Assistants scattered. Diane grabbed her tablet and security badge, her designer heels echoing sharply against the marble floor as she rushed toward the executive elevator, the one that would take her directly to the lobby without stopping. In the adjacent conference room, board members who had been reviewing quarterly projections suddenly found themselves interrupted. Security feeds from the downtown branch flashed onto the main screen, and in that moment, everything changed. "What's happening?" asked Jonathan Prescott, the chairman of the board, as technicians scrambled to enhance the audio. "You need to see this, sir," replied the head of security, his expression grim. The color drained from Prescott's face as he recognized the woman being mistreated by their staff. That's Angela Freeman," stammered another board member. "That's our CEO." "Yes," the security director confirmed. "And this has apparently been going on for 17 minutes already." On screen, they could see it all unfolding in real time. The boardroom fell into stunned silence as their own CEO was treated with contempt in her own bank. "Record everything," Prescott ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Every second, every word, and get legal up here immediately." Back in the bank lobby, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Jessica began to realize that something was very, very wrong. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by the first flickers of uncertainty. Unknown to her and her staff, the security cameras had captured everything, not just their treatment of Angela, but also their treatment of other customers throughout the morning. The pattern of discrimination Angela had witnessed firsthand, every interaction, every disparity, every preferential treatment was now preserved as evidence. The very system designed to protect the bank from external threats was about to expose the threat that had been inside all along. Angela Freeman stood perfectly still, phone now returned to her purse, watching as the realization slowly dawned on Jessica Keller's face. She might have just made the biggest mistake of her career. On the 21st floor of Meridian Financial's headquarters, chaos had erupted in the executive suite. The normally quiet observation room, where security feeds from all branches were monitored, had transformed into a war room within minutes. "Pull up every angle we have," Diane Porter commanded, her voice tight with controlled fury. The head of operations stood ramrod straight in her tailored navy suit, her usual composed demeanor replaced by an intensity that had her staff moving with unprecedented urgency. "I want audio. I want facial recognition. I want timestamps on everything." The security team scrambled to comply, fingers flying across keyboards as they pulled up multiple camera views of the downtown branch lobby, screens filled with different angles of the same humiliating scene. Angela Freeman, their CEO, being treated like a criminal in her own institution. "Camera 3 has the clearest audio," reported a young technician, his face pale as he realized the severity of what they were witnessing. "And we have continuous footage from the moment—" She entered the branch at 9:15 a.m. In the adjacent boardroom, 3 board members who had been in a quarterly planning meeting watched in stunned silence as the security feeds filled the massive wall-sized screens. They could see everything: the smirks, the eye rolls, the blatant disrespect, the clear differences in how customers were treated based solely on appearance. The pattern was undeniable, and it was playing out in real time before their eyes. "Yes," Jonathan Prescott, the board chairman, said grimly, his silver hair seeming even grayer under the weight of what he was witnessing. "That's our CEO." The audio feed kicked in, just in time for Jessica Keller's voice to fill the room. "These check cashing places are really better equipped for your needs." The condescension dripped from every syllable. This wasn't just bad customer service. This wasn't just rudeness. This was systemic discrimination, the kind the board had convinced themselves didn't exist in their institution. "This is happening in our flagship branch," whispered Catherine Reynolds, the third board member present. She didn't need to finish the question. The implication hung in the air. How many other customers had faced this kind of treatment? How many had simply walked away, taking their business elsewhere, never filing complaints, never escalating the issue, just silently accepting what they should never have had to endure? "Get me everything we have on Jessica Keller," Diane Porter barked at her assistant while gathering her tablet and security badge. "Employment history, performance reviews, customer complaints, everything. And call legal. Tell them to meet me downstairs in 15 minutes." As she rushed toward the elevator, Diane scrolled through her tablet, pulling up the branch's analytics. The downtown branch's performance metrics filled the screen, impressive at first glance. Top-tier new account generation, strong loan origination numbers, excellent deposit growth. But when she applied filters to break down the data by customer demographics, the true picture emerged. The patterns were undeniable, hidden in plain sight within their own data. Jessica's branch had the highest account rejection rate for minority applicants, the lowest loan approval rate for Black business owners, a customer attrition rate among people of color that was triple the bank's average. How had they missed this? Or worse, had they simply chosen not to see? Back in the branch lobby, tensions escalated by the second. Jessica had summoned security. A young guard named Thomas stepped forward, barely 25 years old, new to the job, and clearly unprepared for the moral complexity of what he was being asked to do. "I need this woman escorted from the premises," Jessica instructed, not even looking at Angela, as if she were an object, not a person. Her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never had her authority questioned within these walls. She's creating a disturbance and refusing to leave after being denied service. The security guard hesitated. He could sense something was wrong. His gaze flickered between Jessica, his superior, and Angela, whose calm, unshaken presence stood in stark contrast to the manager's growing agitation. Angela turned to him, her voice even and controlled. "Sir," she said, "I have every right to be here. I'm a customer of this bank, attempting to access my own funds. I have provided all required identification and have broken no rules or laws." Thomas, the security guard, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly conflicted. His training had covered robbery protocols and emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared him for this moral gray area. "Ma'am," he started hesitantly. Jessica's face flushed with anger at his hesitation, at being contradicted in front of her staff. "This is a private business, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who may be attempting to commit fraud." The accusation hung in the air. Fraud. Without evidence, without foundation, Jessica had just leveled one of the most serious allegations possible in a banking environment. Yet to those watching, the true fraud was becoming increasingly apparent. The fraud of equal service, of meritocracy, of fairness. The staff had formed a literal wall behind Jessica. Mark stood with arms crossed, his security badge twisted backward so his name wasn't visible. Richard, smirking with casual contempt, twirled a pen between his fingers. Even Beth, who had seemed uncomfortable earlier, now stood in solidarity with her colleagues, though her eyes remained fixed on the floor. The message was clear. It was all of them against Angela, a unified front of institutional power, aligned against a single customer whose only crime was expecting to be treated with basic dignity. Other customers in the branch had taken notice. Some pretended to focus on their own transactions, darting glances toward the confrontation. Others watched openly, their expressions ranging from discomfort to quiet fascination. Then a middle-aged white man stepped forward, inserting himself into the situation with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to occupy any space. "Listen, lady, some of us have real banking to do today," he said, gesturing impatiently. "If you're not going to leave, at least stop causing trouble for everybody else." The irony was painful. Angela thought of the countless meetings where she had emphasized customer experience as the cornerstone of their business model, the training programs she had championed, the inclusion initiatives she had funded, all seemingly worthless in the face of deeply ingrained biases that no corporate memo could erase. Rather than argue, Angela quietly raised her phone and continued documenting the escalating situation. She recorded the staff's expressions, the security guard's discomfort, the customer's intervention, all of it preserved with crystal clarity. Each second of footage was another nail in the coffin of careers built on discrimination. Jessica noticed the recording, and her expression darkened further. The vein in her temple throbbed visibly as she struggled to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly slipping through her fingers. "Photography is not permitted in the bank. This is another violation of our policies." "Actually," Angela replied, her voice steady, "according to Meridian Financial's own customer service policy, Section 4, customers have the right to document any interaction where they feel their rights are being violated." The specificity of her knowledge caught Jessica off guard, but only for a moment. Behind her eyes, questions began to form. Who was this woman, really? How did she know company policies in such detail? How did she have Diane Porter's direct number? But rather than consider these questions, rather than pause to reassess the situation, Jessica's face twisted into an ugly sneer. She turned to the staff and security guard, raising her voice loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she spat. "These people are always trying to game the system. They come in here thinking they know the rules better than we do, looking for any loophole to exploit." The mask had dropped completely now. No more pretense of security concerns. No more false claims of banking protocols. Just naked prejudice on full display, captured forever on the bank's own security system and Angela's phone. Customers were either watching in morbid fascination or pointedly looking away, pretending not to notice the spectacle unfolding before them. Even some staff members began to shift uncomfortably as Jessica's behavior grew more erratic, the veneer of professionalism cracking to reveal the bias beneath. Richard, whose mockery had been so open earlier, now darted uncertain glances at his manager. This was going further than he had expected, crossing lines that even he recognized should never be crossed in a professional setting. Beth, the teller who had first assisted Angela, looked physically ill, her ashen complexion revealing the full weight of what she was witnessing. She had followed procedure, called her manager as required for large withdrawals, but this public humiliation of a customer, was not what she had signed up for. Only Mark remained steadfast in his support of Jessica, his crossed arms and rigid stance a physical manifestation of the institutional barriers Angela had faced throughout her career. Through it all, Angela Freeman stood perfectly still at the center of the storm, her dignity intact, waiting. The weight of the moment, not just for herself, but for every customer who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or denied service based on their appearance, rested on her shoulders. A faint elevator chime sounded in the distance. Jessica's head turned slightly at the sound, momentarily distracted. Something in the air had changed, like the pressure drop before a storm. The grand double doors of Meridian Financial's flagship branch burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls, the sound reverberating through the marble lobby like a thunderclap. Every head turned. Diane Porter strode into the space, her presence commanding immediate attention. The head of operations, second in command of the entire corporation, moved with the focused intensity of someone about to extinguish a fire. "Stop this, immediately." Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, not a request, not a suggestion, a command, and it froze everyone in place. Jessica Keller's expression shifted from irritation to confusion as she recognized the executive. In the 15 years she had managed this branch, Diane Porter had visited perhaps 3 times, always scheduled weeks in advance, always with a formal agenda. Her unexpected appearance now, the fury evident in her stride, triggered the first real flicker of fear in Jessica's eyes. The staff, who had just moments ago stood in unwavering solidarity behind Jessica, suddenly found themselves uncertain. Richard's smirk vanished. Mark's crossed arms dropped to his sides. Beth looked as though she might faint, the color draining from her face entirely. Jessica, desperate to regain control, smoothed her hair and stepped forward, forcing a practiced customer service smile. "Miss Porter, what an unexpected pleasure. Is there something, do you have any idea who this is?" Diane cut her off, gesturing toward Angela, who remained perfectly composed amidst the chaos. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jessica glanced at Angela, then back at Diane, confusion giving way to the first inklings of dread. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was Angela a friend of Diane's? A relative of a board member? A banking regulator? A high-net-worth client they had been trying to court? Around them, the other customers had abandoned all pretense of conducting their own business. Some had phones out, recording the confrontation. An elderly woman, who had witnessed the entire ordeal, nodded in satisfaction, as if justice was finally being served. Thomas, the security guard, took a deliberate step back from Jessica, instinctively distancing himself from what he now recognized as the wrong side of history. Diane approached Angela, her entire demeanor transforming as she did. The righteous anger she had directed at Jessica gave way to profound respect as she addressed the woman who had been so shamefully mistreated. "I am so deeply sorry you experienced this, especially here," she said, her voice carrying through the silent lobby. Then she turned back to face the staff, her expression hardening once more. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "is Angela Freeman, the CEO of Meridian Financial, your boss." The words landed like physical blows. Jessica staggered backward as if struck. Richard's hand flew to his mouth, his eyes widening in horror as the realization of what he had done, who he had mocked, sank in. Mark's face drained of all color, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed repeatedly. Beth began to tremble visibly, tears welling in her eyes. 3 months earlier, in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, Angela Freeman had stood on a stage beneath crystal chandeliers, accepting the ceremonial key to Meridian Financial. The room had been filled with dignitaries, financial leaders, and press, all witnesses to a historic moment as she became the first Black woman to lead a top 10 national bank. Jessica Keller had watched the ceremony on a live stream during a staff meeting. She had applauded politely along with her team, made the appropriate comments about progress and leadership, and then, apparently, whether due to the undercover disguise or her own bias, she had forgotten. Or worse, she had chosen not to recognize the face of her own CEO when she walked into her own branch. "We've been watching," Diane continued, holding up her tablet. On the screen, security footage from throughout the day played in crystal clear definition. "We've seen how you treated Mrs. Freeman, and we've seen how you treat others." The tablet displayed a split-screen comparison. A white customer making a large withdrawal, processed with smiles and efficiency, juxtaposed with a Hispanic customer's identical request, met with scrutiny and suspicion. A wealthy-looking client was escorted directly to an office, while an elderly Black woman waited 40 minutes for basic assistance. Diane's voice tightened with controlled fury. "Every interaction in this branch is recorded, every single one. And what we've witnessed today is a pattern of discrimination so blatant, so egregious, that it violates not only our company policies, but also federal banking regulations." She began listing the violations methodically, each one another nail in the coffin of Jessica's career. Differential treatment based on perceived race or socioeconomic status. Failure to follow standard verification protocols consistently across all customers. Creating a hostile environment for a client attempting to access their own funds. Falsely accusing a customer of potential fraud, without evidence. Jessica's face had turned an alarming shade of red. The carefully constructed facade of her professional persona was crumbling before everyone's eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, straightening her hair again, now a nervous habit rather than a power move. "We have serious security concerns with large cash withdrawals. The protocols—" "Save it," Diane cut her off. "We reviewed the footage of 3 similar withdrawals processed earlier today for other customers. The only protocol you followed consistently was discrimination." Richard stepped forward, tears streaming down his face, his previous confidence replaced by desperate self-preservation. "I was just following Jessica's lead," he pleaded. "We're trained to be cautious with unusual transactions." Mark attempted a different approach, his voice taking on a tone of professional concern. "There have been fraudulent schemes targeting this branch. We were simply exercising appropriate caution in line with—" We have access to every email, every memo, every piece of communication you've sent within this bank system, Diane interrupted sharply. Do not make this worse for yourselves by lying. The main entrance opened again, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Three members of the board of directors entered the lobby, their expressions grave. Jonathan Prescott, Catherine Reynolds, Dennis Whitehill. The highest-ranking authorities in the company, beside Angela herself, had come down from the executive suite to witness the reckoning in person. Their presence elevated what was already a catastrophic event for Jessica and her team to something unprecedented in the bank's history. Board members simply did not appear on the front lines of daily operations. Unless something extraordinary demanded their personal attention, the lobby, already silent, somehow became even quieter. Customers watched wide-eyed as the most powerful figures in the organization formed a semicircle around Angela, a physical manifestation of the support that should have been there all along. Throughout the confrontation, Angela had remained silent, watching, not with satisfaction or vindication, but with the clear-eyed assessment of a leader witnessing a systemic failure that needed correction. This wasn't personal for her. It was institutional, and it was her responsibility to address. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. Jessica, Richard, Mark. She addressed each of them in turn, making deliberate eye contact. You are terminated, effective immediately. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just the simple, incontrovertible exercise of power by someone who had earned the right to wield it. Your actions today have demonstrated that you are fundamentally incompatible with the values of this institution and the legal requirements of fair banking practices, Angela continued. The metrics we value reflect the company we want to be. At the edge of the group, Beth, the young teller who had initiated the interaction with Angela but had shown visible discomfort throughout the ordeal, stood trembling. As Angela approached her, tears streamed down Beth's face. I'm so sorry, Beth whispered, her voice breaking. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do when Jessica and the others. Rather than dismissing the apology or offering easy absolution, Angela listened intently, recognizing the crucial moment for what it was, a genuine opening for change. Learning to stand up against wrongdoing, even when it comes from authority figures, is one of the hardest skills to develop, Angela told her, but it's also one of the most valuable. What happened next would become part of Meridian Financial's corporate lore, a moment referenced in training sessions and leadership seminars for years to come. Angela Freeman, CEO of one of the nation's largest financial institutions, looked at the tearful young teller and saw not just remorse, but potential. Beth, effective immediately, you're being promoted to interim branch manager. The gasp from the staff was audible. Beth's eyes widened in shock. But you're someone who recognized that what was happening was wrong, even if you didn't have the tools or confidence to stop it, Angela cut in. That awareness is the foundation we need to build on. You'll have support, training, and resources. But more importantly, you'll bring the perspective of someone who has seen firsthand how things can go wrong and is committed to making them right. 3 days later, Angela stood behind a podium emblazoned with Meridian Financial's logo, facing a sea of journalists, cameras, and recording devices. The press conference had been hastily arranged, but it was meticulously choreographed to deliver a powerful message. Today, Meridian Financial is announcing our new equitable banking initiative, Angela stated, her professional attire and commanding presence a stark contrast to the modest clothing she had worn during her undercover visit. This comprehensive program represents an investment of $50 million in anti-discrimination training, community outreach, and internal accountability systems. The board members flanked her on the stage, their unified presence a public demonstration of institutional commitment. What the journalists didn't know was how contentious the emergency board meeting had been. Several members had initially balked at the scale of investment and the public admission of fault it represented. It had taken Angela laying out the legal, financial, and reputational risks of inaction, along with the security footage from the branch, to bring the holdouts around. Now they stood beside her, at least outwardly committed to the transformation she envisioned. Banking discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business, Angela continued, her words echoing through the conference hall. When we fail to serve all communities equitably, we leave talent undeveloped, businesses unfunded, and potential unrealized. The cameras panned across the diverse group of individuals seated in the front row, former customers of Meridian who had experienced discrimination firsthand and had agreed to share their stories as part of the initiative. There was Michael Mandel, a successful entrepreneur whose loan application had been denied 3 times despite an impeccable business plan and credit history. Beside him sat Elena Rodriguez, who had been steered away from premium services despite qualifying based on her income, and James Chen, whose attempt to open a business account had been met with excessive documentation requirements not demanded of other clients. Angela acknowledged them with a gesture. These brave individuals have agreed to serve on our newly established Client Equity Advisory Board, ensuring that lived experiences inform our policies moving forward. The press conference made national news, not just for the unprecedented admission of discriminatory practices by a major financial institution, but for the concrete, measurable commitments made to address them. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact would be felt far beyond the walls of Meridian Financial.